Insights channel. Steve here. Well, this evening I'd like to continue on the vein of what I was talking about in the last 3 audios. I mentioned it. I mentioned something that coming right out of one of my books, Jubilees Insights. I didn't go into the details. But we've got some very interesting topics here. Because this evening I'm going to show you some verses proving that sickness came only after the flood. There was no sickness before the great flood, according to the book of Jubilees. And I'll read that to you. We'll start with that. And also I want to read something very odd I noticed. Here is the blessing of writing these books, these insights books on the Apocrypha books. And as I've said before, the Apocrypha books used to be in the King James Version of the Bible till 1885 when they were taken out for whatever reason. Terrible mistake, because they give so much information that you won't find in the Bible. They back up the Bible stories, but they give more details. And that's their value. They're of great value. But I found in one of my books something I hadn't noticed before. I'm always finding secrets and interesting things in my books here, based on the Apocrypha books. There is, I think, a really good explanation here of why the Tower of Babel happened the way it did. Who was behind it, and how come they had so many of these things happening? Why was there so many evil spirits there assisting Nimrod and his clan with building the tower? And what was the real motive of the tower? That is not brought out in the Bible the way it should have been done. Anyway, without further ado, I'll start here in chapter 10 from my book Jubilees Insights. And I named this chapter Demons and the Tower of Babel. Now get these first couple of verses. They nail it about when sickness came into the world. Because it wasn't before the flood. So, verse 1. And in the 3rd week of this Jubilee, the unclean demons began to lead astray the children of the sons of Noah, and to make to err and destroy them. And the sons of Noah came to Noah their father, and they told him concerning the demons which were leading astray, and blinding and slaying his sons' sons. Comment number 1. Here we see the beginning of the spiritual warfare beginning, after the great flood, when what used to be the giants before the great flood, who had all been swept away after the flood, their spirits became the demons, which started to afflict and oppress mankind. Comment 2. It would also appear that all disease and sicknesses started after the great flood, when the earth had become physically very different, with no layer of water or canopy around the earth to protect it from cosmic rays, which cause the aging of mankind. That's right, we read the other day, how long did Adam live? 930 years. After the flood, how long did they live? Well, they quickly went down to about 120, and then eventually lower than that, and as King David said 3,000 years ago, and man's years shall be 70, or 70 years. It's been about like that ever since, on average, 70, 80. It even says, and if your years be 80, yet are they sorrow and pain and toil. And then we get wings and we fly away towards heaven. That's right, that's pretty much how it is. All about aging. Anyway, I digress. Comment 2. It would also appear that, yes, I said that, all the diseases, they weren't there until after the flood, and also before the flood, as others have said, a great canopy around the earth, of water that is, protected us from cosmic rays and all kind of radiation, which caused aging. In studying the book of Enoch and the book of Jasher, as well as this book, Jubilees, which are the books which mention the most about the times before the great flood, there is simply no mention of sickness at all. The only person I remember reading in the Apocrypha books or the Bible from pre-flood times who you could classify it one way as a sickness, and that was Lamech the blind. Not the Lamech who was the son of Methuselah, but Lamech, an earlier Lamech, who was one of the descendants of Cain that I talked about in another audio. But anyway, it did said that he went blind when he got older. But I think that was more like a curse, because he was also the one who killed Cain. And it said, whosoever killed Cain will be cursed sevenfold, right? Well, it was Lamech, his relative, that killed him by accident, because he couldn't see properly. He was going blind. But it sounded to me more like a curse than a blessing or a sickness or something like that. Comment 3. After the great flood, the demons, who are the disembodied spirits of the giants, those giants, of course, that were created according to Genesis 6, and the fallen angels came down, cohabited with the women on the earth, and created these massive creatures, these giants. But they weren't as they supposed. They were malignant and evil, and because they were grew to be so big, mankind could not provide them enough food, so they started to become cannibals and started devouring everything in sight. Terrible, terrible result of rebellion of the fallen angels. That's what happened. It says the same thing in Genesis 6 as it does in this book here, Jubilees, book of Jubilees, and the book of Jasher, round about the same chapters as well, 5 or 6 in this book that talks about the same thing. And so does the book of Enoch. Very consistent about how the past actually happened, how evil came into the world. After the great flood, the demons, who were the disembodied spirits of the giants, were no longer directly oppressing mankind face to face in the physical realm in the form of giants, but more indirectly through the spiritual realm, influencing mankind through their thoughts, feelings, desires, and lusts, and causing mankind to be tempted with perversions, corruptions, and violence. I would point out here, with many things and many desires, it's okay if it's not overdone. It's the excess desire that turns to lust, and excessive lust becomes dangerous, even forceful, and therein lies the demonic problem. But there's a lot of things that are not evil in themselves. They're okay in moderation, as Paul would say in the New Testament, let your moderation be known unto all men. Don't drink too much. Whatever you do, just don't do too much of it. Enjoy life, yes, but just don't do too much of anything, lest it takes you in the wrong direction spiritually, which can be into the evil realm. The demons also cause contentions between people. Many people contend that all sickness is brought by demons. Yeah, John Todd said that. See, okay, right. Before the flood, the fight against the bad spirits in the giants was directly physical. But after the flood, they came back yet again to oppress mankind spiritually. Before the flood, the evil of the giants and their fathers, the fallen angels, was very obvious and visible. After the flood, it was much more deceptive and hidden across the veil of dimensions. Ephesians 6:12. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. 2 Corinthians 10:4. Well, the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds. Okay, well, I'm going to jump through this chapter now. It's got a lot of fascinating things in here, but it's a very long chapter. We're going to go to when we're talking about them building the Tower of Babel. This is absolutely amazing. If you just read the account in the Bible, you only get a small idea of what the Tower of Babel was really like. You have to read the Apocrypha books of Jubilees and Jasher, especially those two, to fully understand about the Tower of Babel. And even then, I suspect some of the interesting details have been hidden away somewhere, because Satan doesn't like people to know what really goes on, so he tries and hide the truth as much as he can. But I'll try and tell it in simple terms now, from what I understand. And I'm saying this right now. What happened was, at the Tower of Babel, it was about 200 years after the flood. And it was born to one of the descendants of Ham, just a couple of generations, this guy called Nimrod. A very talented person. And Nimrod, it says something very strange about Nimrod. It says, and Nimrod began to be a Nephilim, or Rephaim is the right word, or there was something about him that was turning him into a giant. The question is why. That you'll find in the Apocryphal books about this Nimrod guy. We also find out that when they decided to build this tower to heaven, massive tower, was much bigger than anybody can even begin to imagine. This wasn't some tiny little skyscraper of 1,000 feet. The Tower of Babel got up to something between 9,000 and 11,000 feet when it was stopped by God himself. Imagine something that high. But the big question is, what were they really up to? You'll find by studying that they were not just interested in building for themselves a big tower. No. You find out what they were looking for is they were actually looking for a door, a portal, if you want to call it, at some sort of height where they could get into heaven and yank God out of heaven, throw him out, and put their own selves and their idols in heaven. That was their idea. They say it clearly in the book of Jasher and Jubilees, what their real intent was. Now, how did they know there was some sort of portal in the sky at a certain altitude? Well, that's a very interesting question. But I want you to also know it wasn't just man that built those towers. They had other entities building the tower with them. Demonic entities, or giants, as well as demons, a bit of both. How that's possible, well, that's we need to investigate more to find out all the details. But I was just wondering, wait a minute, it sounds to me, the more I read from the Apocryphal books as well as the Bible, combine it, this massive tower was built, but it was built for a bigger reason than just to have a nice tower for Nimrod's city there, or right next to it. They were trying to get somewhere with that tower. They were trying to reach the upper atmosphere. They were trying to get into heaven, or let's say get into the spirit world, and they were trying to get in there and fight against God and throw him out and put themselves in. I know it sounds incredibly stupid, but the devil's people are very stupid. Or they keep thinking they can win when there's no way they can win. That's how the reality really is. But there's another point that none of us have considered, as far as I know. In order for them to build this tower, and it says there was 750,000 men working to build that tower. And to show you how demonic it was, it says that it was so high up that, and it took a year for a person to carry bricks and stuff from the ground up to the top of the tower, right, at one stage. Think of that. And it says, and if a man was carrying stuff and actually fell over the edge, those building the tower would grieve over the fact they lost the bricks, but they couldn't care less about what happened to the man who fell over the edge. You'll find that in his books, of these Apocrypha, these details like that. And I said, well, that doesn't sound like a human reaction to not care about other humans dying. That sounds more like what we hear in some of these elite who have the attitude of, we're just a bunch of cockroaches, mankind's in the way, we're going to get rid of mankind soon, replace them by machines and AI, because we've decided we with our wealth do not need human beings. That attitude is not human. God has given humans a heart and a conscience and a will and the ability to choose. But there are obviously other kind of entities, call them aliens if you want, I call them demons and devils. But those beings, those entities, they don't have a heart, they don't have a soul, and they're very destructive. So anyway, the Tower of Babel was not just built by human beings. There were other beings there too as well who had an agenda. As I said before, throw God out of heaven and replace him with Satan and demons and devils and fallen angels. But of course their plan came to naught because God came down, saw the nonsense they're up to, and actually smashed their tower, confused their one language into many languages, and sent them all packing into four corners of the earth. It's a very interesting story, and if you want to read, you should read my book Jubilees Insights. Chapter 10 talks all about it. But there is one other point I wanted to bring up that's new. I just discovered it the other day. I was reading through Jubes Insights with my wife, enjoying reading it, and suddenly I came across this in chapter 8. In the 29th Jubilee, in the first week, like I say, it was just a short time after the flood. In the beginning thereof, Arphaxad took to himself a wife, and he had a son, and called his name Canaan, not Cainan. That was a son from Ham. Cainan, not Cainan. This is Canaan, and this was from the Shem line, Shem lineage. And the son grew, and his father taught him writing, and he went to seek for himself a place where he might seize for himself a city. So this guy wanted to build himself a city, right? His grandson of Noah. And he found a writing which former generations had carved on a rock. Now, the only generation that could have written it was people from before the flood. And he read what was thereon, and he transcribed it. Maybe he read it but couldn't understand it, so he copied it onto a piece of paper. Not a good idea in this case. And then it says, and he sinned owing to it, for it contained the teaching of the watchers, in accordance with which they used to observe the omens of the sun, moon, stars, and signs of heaven. Now, I'll tell you what my take on this is. I think this guy didn't know what he was dealing with, and it said, because of it, he sinned owing to it. And whatever he did, it led to some really bad things happening. And I think that there are certain writings which are very dangerous indeed, especially if they're written by the fallen angels. It's something like to do with witchcraft. It's something to do with, I don't really know, wizardry, spells, curses, something like that. And I think from reading other stories like the giants, story of the book of the giants, they knew that God was going to bring judgment. So did the fallen angels. And I think, contrary to what is taught, I don't think the pyramids, for example, were built by the Egyptians. I think they were there from pre-flood times, and there's a lot of proof of that. But those weren't the only buildings. All around the earth, you find all kinds of structures and built with writing on them. And some of the writing is very odd, in very old languages. And I think here's a case it's talking about where something the watchers themselves, the full names, they wrote something deliberately on a rock, and by which reason this person, the grandson of Noah, one of the sons, or maybe grandson of Shem, great grandson of Noah, he finds this writing of the watchers, didn't quite understand it, but he transcribed it, he copied it, but because of it, it caused great sin and great evil happened. Now, what I think happened is this guy, he had something to do with why the Tower of Babel happened. Why did I say that? Because I'm convinced the fallen angels knew the flood was coming, the giants knew it too, and they thought, look, we could at least send some information or messages, write it down for generations that come after God's judgments. And I'm also convinced there are writings which, in the way they are made by witchcraft and sorcery, that anybody coming along dumbly not understanding, they could put themselves in grave danger. Either even by saying the word, or copying it, or using it in some way. And I think what happened there, here's the first example I can find after the flood of somebody, because of what they said or what they wrote down or transcribed, they opened a portal. They opened a portal to the negative spirit world where you had all these, what used to be the giants, the disembodied spirits of the giants, just waiting to try and get out and come back to the physical realm. They found a way because they found somebody who was disobedient. This same guy, he didn't even tell Noah. He was afraid to tell Noah what he'd seen. He didn't tell him. He was afraid of it. And it caused great sin. It doesn't embellish on it here and tell you enough about it, but it seems to me, this guy, he was responsible for opening the door to the devils and the demons. And so it wasn't long later that they had all these spirits coming in and helping mankind building the tower, which had evil intent, as I mentioned before. So I think that this, I call it the writing of the wicked watchers. I think that had a lot to do with how many spirits and ex-giant spirits came in and helped mankind build that Tower of Babel with the intent to get into heaven and throw God off his throne. It's a silly idea. Like I said, the devil's people have some very silly ideas, and they don't have the power to do what they want to do. As you know, God came down and clobbered them and clobbered their tower. End of that shenanigans. And the devil had said, "Curse us, fall again." Yeah, well, that's so it's very, very interesting details in these Apocrypha books, and you can read stuff like that in my books, Insights books. This one happened to be Jubilees Insights. One other detail on this guy, Canaan. Did you know that this guy, Canaan, he's mentioned in these Apocrypha books? He's also mentioned in the Septuagint version of the Bible, right? But you know what? He's not mentioned in the King James version of the Bible, which I find very odd. Somehow or other, somebody didn't like this guy, Canaan. Probably because he became a sorcerer with what he found out. He became very evil, and also because he was the good bloodline, he was lineage of Shem. And because of that, somebody didn't like the fact he was there, so they took him out of the lineage from Noah, Arphaxad, on down. He took this guy, Canaan, out of the lineage. So you don't see it in the King James version of the Bible and the lineage after the flood. You see it in Septuagint. It makes you very suspicious that they didn't like the fact that this guy, of who his lineage was, that he came from supposedly good stock, but he was evil, and he became sorcerer and evil because he got involved with the Watchers' writings. And I think they probably found out that because of him, they had all that trouble, the Tower of Babel, eventually, and then man got scattered in the whole world, so they wanted nothing to do with his name, because there was nothing to do with but except witchcraft and sorcery. I think that's why this guy, Canaan, was excluded from the King James version of the Bible. Well, that's basically it, what I want to explain. Now, you can read this from chapter 8 from my book, Jubilees Insights, from Writings of the Wicked Watchers, and chapter 10 gives a lot of information about the Tower of Babel, which I haven't really gone into today and all the details. There's a lot of information in there. So if you want to know what happened there in the Bible, the Tower of Babel, who was involved, how high it really was, how big it really was, and all the other crazy nonsense they were up to, and who was actually there, then read my book, Jubilees Insights. There's now 8 Insights books, from Enoch Insights, Eden Insights, Jasher Insights, Jubilees Insights, Testament Told Patriarchs Insights, Esdras Insights, and I've got 2 books on the paranormal and supernatural called Out the Bottomless Pit, books 1 and 2. So I do encourage people, do get my books. They're designed to be study books to help people to know their Bibles better and to know the ancient Hebrew books, stories, and to know what has happened in our biblical history, what God did from creation until 1,000 years from now, when 7,000 years of biblical history will end and we'll enter into the eternal age, new heaven, new earth. Well, thanks again for listening, everybody. Hope you found that interesting. Have a very great day, evening, afternoon, or whatever it is, wherever you are. Thanks for listening.